you are an entrepreneur yourself. You founded a private equity fund, and now you find yourself in the position of saying, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. How's that going to work? I'm sure you have some very interesting ideas about what you're going to do.
Well, Natasha, thank you, and Vijay, thank you for the introduction. Certainly the state of Illinois is not historically been known for maybe innovation in the way we think of it in the last 2 decades. However, there's so much great opportunity and innovation. Some of the things that Vijay mentioned in water, food, and energy, that hits in the sweet spot of what the state can do. To your specific question, Natasha, I think what we're bringing to the state is a different approach, and I don't come from public life, so what I've said to a lot of people, I feel like I'm earning 2 graduate degrees right now. It's simultaneously, 1, how to be a public servant, and 2 is how to take on the role of being the economic development czar for this state. But we think the state has so many great assets. We just don't think there have been the right people leading that in a way to capitalize on those assets. And when I was interviewed for this position by a local radio station about 5 weeks ago, they asked me the question, they said, are you nuts? Why are you doing this? Why would you take on this position? And I said to them, I said, the reason is that we have so many great assets. They're just underutilized. And we have those as an example. 1871's a burgeoning opportunity, and many other things I'll talk about. But that I think, is the opportunity for this state.
So talk to me more about the strengths that you see in not just Illinois, but in the region, because as you and I were discussing before we came on, I kind of feel like people do think too much about their own state in this country. They don't think regionally about all the assets and resources there. So tell me a little bit more about what you think of as the strengths. Yeah. We
did have the occasion to chat a bit beforehand, and the way I look at it is that borders are simply political in nature, and that's it. Economy is global, and so as we look at developing this state and its economic power, we're going to reach out to other states. I have meetings scheduled with other counterparts in states around the region. We look to do trade missions with our counterpart states and do it in a collaborative fashion. I analogize it to I'll call it a football or basketball conference. If you have one dominant team in that conference, it's a pretty weak conference. So in the case of the Big Ten, which has 14 teams, we want to have 14 great teams in the conference. So by analogy, we want Michigan to be healthy, and Michigan wants Illinois to be healthy. So that's a little bit the spirit we have today that we're going to be developing with our counterpart states.
So what specifically do you think that the government really should be doing to sort of help businesses to start up, to innovate, and also even to let's just go with those 2.
Sure. I think the role that the government can play is to be a catalyst beyond just the traditional tax incentives and things like that. We have to be a stimulator and create new opportunities, bring capital into the region. One of the things I'm working on is an opportunity to bring West Coast venture funds to our region to look at some of the ag and food opportunities. They clearly have those opportunities in the Central Valley by example, but they don't have what we have. We have most phenomenal water supply in the world, with the Great Lakes and 3 rivers that run adjacent or through this state. So as we look at water crisis, which Vijay mentioned, water issues, that's a leveraging point. So our responsibility is to try to connect more than just what I'll call tax policy, but also bring in outside resources both domestically and globally.
Do you have any, when you look back at sort of your personal history, I mean, do you bring any kind of lessons perhaps to, in terms of innovating, in terms of entrepreneurship? Tell me about some of your failures.
Sure. So kind of 2 questions there, but
yes.
I think most importantly that I'm a 5th generation Illinoisan. I grew up in East Central Illinois in a small town of 600 people. Many of you saw my height. I'm the average height in this community. It's a very tall town. The name of the town is Teutopolis, the town of the Teutons, or the town of the Germans. I grew up in a 200-yard radius of where 5 generations grew up. And so as I thought about taking this position, I thought about the pioneering fashion of my great-great-grandfather and said, in many ways today, with the state of our state of Illinois and the opportunity we have to be pioneers. We have to be innovators, and we have to go forward in a way to try to build this state into the great opportunity we think it has. So that gives a little bit of flavor about kind of my perspective. So I did not aspire to be in public life. As I told Natasha earlier, You want me to tell that story?
Tell the story.
The governor and I are fairly good friends. We've known each other for about 6 years. He approached me shortly after the election in November and asked me to serve as what he calls Secretary of Commerce. My real title's Director of Commerce, but that aside, I turned him down abruptly in about a 30-second phone conversation. He made 2 more attempts, and finally, as I told Natasha, the 4th attempt, he had me in a restaurant in the corner and I couldn't get out. I told my wife as I was going to have dinner with him, I said to her, nah, not going to do it. She said, what do you think the chances are? I said, 10% chance. As I drove home that night, I said, 90% chance. So my odds making and my ability to predict success and my ability to predict failure.
But why
probably,
did you not want to do the job?
I've always been in private life. I didn't aspire to be in the public spotlight. I have taken 2 companies public. In both cases, got off the board prior to going public. It's just not a style or thing that I aspired to be involved in. But clearly, I think the governor thought I could be successful at it, and so hopefully I won't let him down. But to your other question on failure, we want to transition to that because that other story's kind of boring. So on failures, so I have invested in about 40 companies in my lifetime. I started a few of them and invested in many others. Clearly, we've had some great successes, and those trophies are fun to talk about. But the reality of our success has been from the lessons learned in our failures. And many of you as innovators and entrepreneurs know about that. The challenges of meeting payroll. In our first fund that we started in the late 90s, we had 15 companies we invested in. 5 of them were complete failures, complete write-offs. And the lessons learned were, which tie to the job today, invest in great people. Innovation is largely, I'll call it secondary. But I think a third issue is invest in people and in opportunity relative to the capacity of where the location of the company might be. And by that example, 2 real quick examples, both in success and failure. One of our successes was a company we started that today resides in Santa Clara, California, called Infoblox. It started in Evanston, Illinois. University of Illinois professor created a technology for the internet, a hardware technology. We could not raise a C round in this region, but we could do it if we moved the company to the West Coast. That company went public on the New York Stock Exchange 3 years ago. Wonderful success for us. But it came down to we couldn't get the talent to build the company out here in this region, and we couldn't find the capital. So as we look at how we build things in this region, and in regions beyond Illinois, we look at the core assets. Michigan's great in auto manufacturing. That's an asset we want to leverage. So as we think about failure, we need to think about how do we leverage our successes, leverage our assets, if that's another way to get there.
I mean, as I understand it, it's becoming easier to get venture capital, but you're still saying it's like a barrier at certain levels.
It's much more dynamic than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
And what do you put that down to, if you don't mind me asking?
I think the Great Recession stimulated some of that.
Right.
I think if I've looked at a lot of statistics from 08 to 09 in this state, our number of new business and corporations or LLCs formed went from about 60,000 to almost 210,000 year over year. And now it's dropped down to about 60,000. So the norm is around 60,000. So I think a lot of people said, I have to go out and do something different. So I think that was the Great Recession was a great thing for innovation, despite the hardship all of us went through at that time. I think the other thing that's happening is I think there's an aptitude and attitude in this region about what we've had as successes and saying we need to provide that capital and provide it in a more dynamic way. So some of the crowdfunding things I think are great opportunities to help stimulate that.
And do you think the government, the state of Illinois, can ever be really comfortable with the kind of failures that you're happy with seeing at a corporate level, in fact, expect to see?
So that's my job. My job is risk mitigation. We cannot take our taxpayers' dollars and put that at risk, but we can collaborate in ways that maybe don't put it at risk at that level. Fortunately, in my second fund that we started in the mid-2000s, 7 investments, no failures. So lessons learned going back to the failures of the first fund, again, focus on core assets, focus on innovation, focus on team. And so that'll be my job to make sure that we mitigate the risk of our taxpayer dollars here in this state.
What do you think when you look at, I mean, I know that one of the issues for any company in the region is getting kind of key staff, and I was talking to someone just before the conference started about some problems they had getting engineers. I mean, is that something that the state has any kind of lever that it can pull on to actually kind of encourage the right people to come here, to stay here, to be educated here? I mean, what we see is some fine universities, fine institutions churning out, and we see graduates leaving. And is there something the state can do about that? Is that your role even?
It is our role, and it is something I think we can do. I'm friends with Dr. Bob Easter at the University of Illinois, and in addition, we have the Northwestern University, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, and many others. We think we have some of the core assets to build upon. And so, yes, and so we intend to develop programs. I have a meeting next Tuesday down in Champaign with the university to talk about how we can develop more opportunities. One of the ideas is to perhaps create internships for students, particularly at the University of Illinois, which is in Champaign, about 2 hours south of here. Create internship opportunities up here in Chicago for those students so they get a sense of the city. If all they live is in the cornfields of central Illinois and don't know the city of Chicago, it's easy to move to San Francisco and say, well, that's a more fun place to live. The city of Chicago is a great place. It's a world-class city, and we intend to leverage that as we think about those engineers that have historically moved to the West Coast for jobs.
Right. And so now that we have a sort of new regime in Springfield, I mean, is this going to be the end of sort of the tax breaks to keep companies here? Is this a sort of clean broom, or are we still going to be reverting to that sort of policy?
We clearly have to take care of our corporate citizens, the companies that are here providing jobs. We're looking at different ways that we might create alternative incentives instead of what I'll call the legacy approaches that have been taken in this state. We haven't fully developed it. I've been on the job 5 weeks, and I no longer will have that crutch in a week because now I'm in the job and have to be more responsive. But we're developing some newer ideas. Instead of using what we call edge tax credits to retain jobs, we'd like to think of different ways to create new stimulations, such as job training opportunities, and preparing our next generation for a new way of doing things, new digital manufacturing opportunities, et cetera.